Oh boy. Oh no, oh no, oh. We made a mess, ladies and gentlemen, and I am quite pleased with it, in fact. So every now and again, I will just like make one of my cute little TikTok edits and like whatever it is that I do. And for whatever reason, only certain ones will somehow pop off. Like, I'll post ones that do normal and go normal places and everything is well and good. But then sometimes you post one that pops off really fast and hits the wrong side of the app. That happened the other day, and it gave me yet another reason to once again pop open this book and talk about one of my favorite parts of it. So I feel like I have to bring this book out like once a quarter because it really is a relevant piece of literature. And now the context of this book is that this was written by actually a German soldier from World War II who had been captured as a prisoner of war and who was shown all the realities of what his country was doing to other people during that war. This book and his many other books are a product of him then going to unlearn all of that propaganda, unlearn all of this ugliness that had tainted the German identity and, you know, like fascism and all these other things, and to work with the people that his country had hurt to learn more about religion, ethnicities, cultures, people, all that other kind of stuff. And so these books are extremely powerful as pieces of liberation theology. Liberation theology is theology that is dedicated towards the liberation of all people, be they, any race, any gender or sexuality. Liberation theology is dedicated to helping people find Christ and use the message of the gospel to uplift people rather than push them down. But now, as we go through this video, right, again, simple video, but as we go through the comments on it, a lot of what I notice, and that I've talked about with my other friends who are religious scholars and priests and all these other things themselves, what we notice about these people is that they have such an investment in telling Christian witches what is and what isn't, right? So they have such an investment in saying, no, you can't do this religion this way. You have to do it my way, aka the right way. I'm not telling you this. The Bible's telling you this. God is telling you this. But then when you point out that actually the Bible doesn't really say exactly what they think it says, that you need to have some basis in academia, scholarship, what have you, to understand that concept, suddenly they shut down. Suddenly there's, I don't need anything except the Bible. I don't need anyone to explain it to me. I don't need anything this, that, and the other thing. Even though the Bible itself has a story about God sending someone to explain a Bible verse to them. That was my favorite with can't God make clear his message on his own, or do you think he's that weak? Meanwhile, God is actively sending Philip. God is not coming himself to this person who was confused reading these verses from Isaiah. God was sending Philip to go explain it. So, like, remember that Family Guy episode where, like, Lewis is being like, hey, maybe God is sending healing through all the doctors and the medicine that we have, and you shouldn't stand around expecting him to just lightning bolt your illness away? That's what it feels like trying to talk to these people, where it's like, hey, do you think that maybe the scholars who spend their entire lives studying the religion, doing the archaeology, all that other kind of stuff to figure out exactly what was going on, don't you think maybe God sent these people to guide us back to the correct understanding that we people have messed up on purpose? Nonetheless, right? So this is the thing. We're all sitting here, and of course, when do I miss an opportunity to be a giant pain in the ass? So of course I'm in all these comments being like, oh well, sucks, right? Mostly also because I am a social media manager and I know how algorithms work, and I know that people leaving like 20 billion comments help me out a lot with my reach, but they've done a great help for that video as they were trying to lecture me about what's on. Still, the point being, they have this very insistent idea that I must be a heretic, I'm wrong because I'm not following the Bible, however they think to interpret the Bible, and I'm not following the Catechism of the Catholic Church and any of these other things. And it just makes me think of Jurgen Moltmann, who I will read to you thusly, right? On page 21, he starts talking about the identity and relevance of faith, and in that, he claims that many people have a Pusillanimous faith. Pusillanimous means showing a lack of courage or determination, right? Timid. So, with that said, right, he goes, faith is fearful and defensive when it begins to die inwardly, struggling to maintain itself and reaching out for security and guarantees. In doing so, it removes itself from the hand of the one who has promised to maintain it, and its own manipulations bring it to ruin. This pusillanimous faith usually occurs in the form of an orthodoxy, which feels threatened and is therefore more rigid than ever. Quick pause here to point out that the term orthodoxy means correct belief. It occurs wherever, in the face of the immorality of the present age, the gospel of creative love for the abandoned is replaced by the law of what is supposed to be Christian morality, and by penal law. He who is of little faith looks for support and protection for his faith, because it is preyed upon by fear. Such a faith tries to protect its most sacred things, God, Christ, doctrine, and morality, because it clearly no longer believes that these are sufficiently powerful to maintain themselves. When the religion of fear finds its way into the Christian church, those who regard themselves as the most vigilant guardians of the faith do violence to the faith and smother it. And so before all that, he says, the decay of faith and its identity through a decline into unbelief and a different identity, as in, like, when people stop believing in Christianity because they're watching this faith become outdated, become abusive to people, when they see that Christianity, like so many people say, I read the Bible and I watched how people acted and I could no longer be a Christian. When people fall into unbelief and faith decays because the actual relevance of the faith to, the message of love no longer applies, he says it's an exact parallel to, the decay through a decline into a fearful and defensive faith. So when Jurgen Moltmann talks about identity and relevance, that's what he means, right? Where the people who leave the church to become social workers, psychologists, community help people, right, like political activists, all these people, when they leave the church to become these people who are more focused on justice and liberation and freedom, and they can no longer align themselves with this church as a result, that is a conflict of relevance. Meanwhile, when other people who want Christianity to stay Christianity, no matter how the world evolves around them, because what they think Christianity is this gigantic book of extremely rigid, strict, punishing rules that confine and very narrowly defined people into these little boxes, that becomes an issue of identity, right? So we've got this kind of problem here where some people want the church to remain the church, and by that they mean whatever really outdated understanding of religion they have, and other people want the church to actually do what the fuck it's supposed to do, which is help people. We have ourselves an impasse here, right? So people bringing a decline of faith through their unbelief and just their inability to, be in alignment with a church that does not help people is parallel to a decline of faith due to people gripping onto what is right, what is correct, what is the law, what is sin, and this and that and all these other things. So of course, the people who are in my comments like this, they don't see that, they don't understand that, and they insist that what they're doing is still right and godly, but meanwhile, as soon as I get an inkling of what they think witchcraft is, Christian witchcraft, it's clear to me that they don't actually understand anything at all that I'm saying, that they refuse to, that even when they say, I'm here to hear you out and see your point of view, they immediately, when they cannot change my mind, default back into that pusillanimous faith, that extreme rigid orthodoxy, that violent defense of it. These people are doing harm to the Christian religion. It shows that they don't actually want to have a dialogue with me. They don't actually want to sit down and explain it, because I've talked to many Christians who, the millisecond I actually start explaining what Christian witchcraft is, they understand. They get it completely, and they vibe with it. And it doesn't matter if they're normal people, it doesn't matter if they're priests, it doesn't matter if they're scholars, it doesn't matter what the case is. When people who are actually interested in the gospel, as in the part where it tells you to love one another and meet one another where they are, when those people actually come to listen about what Christian witchcraft is and discuss what it means to be religious and how superstition and religion are so inherently intertwined, they will actually understand it. And that's why the term Christian witch itself is kind of like a lobster cage for this shit, right? So people say, why don't you call yourself a healer instead of a witch? And it's exactly for this reason that we use the term Christian witch. When we use the term witch, we see immediately who is maybe just a little confused and could use some explanation. And we also say who is not willing to talk and who is willing only to puff up their own ego by projecting their understanding of the Bible. For all they love to quote 1 Corinthians, they kind of miss the part where Paul says that he becomes all things to all people so he can meet all people where they are and help them understand the gospel and the message of Christ, right? So, like, as Christian witches, we understand that there are many people who would love to, learn more about God, be with God, but just don't know how to do that as who they are. And so the thing about God is that you never have to break who you are or fundamentally change who you are to be with him. Obviously, like, you can't just, like, hurt people, but nobody is fundamentally someone that hurts people. That's usually a product of some serious, like, issues, right? Trauma or, some kind of environmental cause. These are the things that would cause these kinds of violence and these kinds of institutions that encourage people to do harm to one another, like the patriarchy. Like, these are the things that would cause people to be different than who they really are, which is inherently, in my opinion, all people are people. They are capable of good and harmony and peace. It's when their environment screws it up that things become such an issue. But people who are just interested in meeting God more directly and understanding God more directly through the ritual that people have done for thousands of years, there's nothing wrong with that. And these people, they don't see how the religion, that all religion really is inherently mystical in that sense. I've had some people outright decry even mysticism, despite the fact that so much of the beauty of Christianity is couched in the mysteries, in mysticism. It's this narrow idea of faith that makes people so unstable. And that's why I said they have this extreme insecurity in their faith, like, on a level that I just can't fathom, right? Because for me, like, if someone didn't want to be a Christian witch and they didn't want to use magic, that's on them. I mean, like, I will be the first to admit to you that Christian witchcraft is not necessarily for all people. It's a very self-directed, self-motivated, and difficult path. It requires a lot of self-discipline. It requires a lot of deep work, learning, scholarship. It requires a lot of active time, hands-on, scary work. It requires things that most people are more comfortable not engaging in. And I understand that. So I'm never going to push someone to be a Christian witch that doesn't want to be. The only thing I do think is that anyone who follows a deity should have some reliable way of communicating with that deity. That's really it. As far as I'm concerned, if you have a reliable way of communicating with your deity and getting signs or answers when you ask a question, great. That is all you need. But these people seem to have such a vested interest in what I believe, because they'll pop up on multiple of my videos as if I can't see their comments. Well, no, they know I can see their comments. But they'll pop up on my videos. They'll constantly come back to, keep shouting at me, all their whatever nonsense. They'll just keep going as if that's going to change my mind. The problem is, though, I am secure in my faith, and I don't need to go out of my way to defend it. I could go type in Christian witch on TikTok and go onto the videos of everyone who disagrees with it and start a bunch of nonsense, because I know that I am justified in what I do. But I don't do that because there's no point. It's not a functional use of my time, and I really don't care what other people believe. At the end of the day, their walk with God is up to them, and I trust God to show them the way. And I also trust that if they get caught by the egregore, they probably weren't interested in what actual God has to say anyway. But all this talk about, opening portals to demons and leading people astray and leading people to hell is such a sign of fear and such a sign of lack of trust in not only God, but the very pinnacles, the pedestals that hold the religion up. They don't think that the religion can withstand itself. They don't think that the religion can protect itself. And honestly, the way things are going, Christianity does stand to kind of fizzle out because of not the devil, but people like this. Moltmann talks about that as well, where, these people, they lament the assimilation of Christianity to the secularized society which has declined since the good old days, and bewail the loss of identity in those who in theology and in practice involve themselves in the conflicts of this society and work with others to resolve them. But by this reaction, they themselves are running the risk of lost identity by passive assimilation. They accept the increasing isolation of the church as an insignificant sect on the margin of society and encourage it by their sectarian withdrawal. So, these people, by trying to maintain this rigid idea of Christianity and just kind of missing the point of the whole religion, they actively isolate themselves because people don't want anything to do with them anymore. People don't want anything to do with a Christianity that looks so narrow-minded, so obtuse, so cold to the hurt and harm that others are experiencing at the hands of systemic abuse and violence. They are, unempathetic. They are so focused on virtue signaling that they forget to actually help their neighbor. They become something that is just bitter and hard and cold, and it's for that reason that people leave the church. And that's also why Moltmann says people are so obsessed with the end times and the rapture and all that. He says people grow tired of maintaining the open situation of dialogue and cooperation with others, in which the boundaries are always fluid, and looked for the final hour, in which the only possible response is yes and no. In this post-Christian, legalistic apocalyptic, the present time becomes the moment of great decision. The world is lapsing into the spiritual death of atheism, atomic catastrophe, the death of the young from drugs or ecological self-destruction, and at the same time it is the hour in which the true church has to rise up as the visible place of refuge in the disaster, rise up for the final struggle. It cannot be denied that such visions of the future exist in the New Testament and that the crisis of history may come to such critical end. But nowhere in the New Testament does the end of the world bring about the second coming of Christ. The New Testament looks forward to the very reverse, that the second coming of Christ will bring the end of destruction and persecution to the world. Anyone who reads the signs of the times with the eyes of his own existential anxiety reads them falsely. In essence, people are so obsessed with the end times because they don't want to have to actually do the work to make the world better, to open their hearts up to people who aren't like them, which is exactly what Christianity needs to do. I could come on here with all kinds of snappy comments, again, about these people who display this kind of pusillanimous faith in my comments. The only thing I do end up feeling after, reading this again and thinking about it is just being really sad for these people, because they want so desperately to cling to something that will give them some sense of peace and security in a very tumultuous world where a lot of messy things are happening. But the problem is they cannot see the forest for the trees, and so they project all of their rules and superstitions and ritual onto people who they think are outside of it. Meanwhile, they don't recognize that we are, as Christian witches, the ones who are simply calling a spade and acknowledging that ritual, acknowledging that, yes, witchcraft and religion as a whole is about dealing with the things we cannot control in the world, right? Negotiating with our deities and negotiating with the universe and saying, okay, well, I really don't want it to hail, I don't want there to be a thunderstorm, I really want my crop to be good, I really want my lover to accept me, blah blah, all this other kind of stuff. This is where witchcraft as symbol spells or prayer as a religious thing both become a hand-in-hand situation. There's a reason that prayer and spell were essentially the same thing, especially among all kinds of different religions at the time of Christ. It's very similar to the New Age witches who insist that there's specific rules of witchcraft, that if you don't follow them, you're going to get hurt, right? Like the threefold law and all the other kind of stuff that's religion specific. It's just people who are scared of the world and who are scared of what's to come, who are trying to push their idea of how to avoid calamity on everybody else. And for me, when it comes to how we might withstand that, all I can really say is that, like, there's a reason. There's a reason that God gave me this job, and that's because I've always been someone who really just did not have the room or ability to care about what other people thought about what I did or what I could do. So, like, to tell this story, when I was a child, there was some kid who, like, in hindsight, probably had a lot of problems at home because he was always acting out. He was always causing problems for other kids and trying to get people to pay attention to him, which, you know, usually is a sign that, like, they aren't getting a lot of attention at home. Of course, at the time I was, like, 4, so I didn't really think about it. I wasn't, like, super understanding of psychology at 4, but what I did understand was that whatever he did didn't really matter. So, like, one day I remember very distinctly, I was building, like, a little sand lump in the sand or something. I might have been older, I might have been like 6, I don't know. But regardless, I was just literally making a little lump of sand, like, you know how kids do. You get sand a little wet and you pile it up and pretend it's like a birthday cake. That's what I like to do. And he came over and he stepped on it, he squished it. And I was like, okay. Alright. I was the queen of unbothered as a child. I was like, alright, I'll just make another one. And he's like, you can't do that. For me, did not compute. I was like, what do you mean I can't do that? I'm gonna, just like I did the first time, I'm gonna take the sand and I'm gonna, yeah, I can do that. And he's like, no, you can't. Like, much louder this time. And I'm like, I know, I'm pretty sure this will work. I can, yep. And so then he's like yelling in my face. It's like, no, you can't do that. To the point that the teacher now comes over, or whatever the hell person who's watching us, takes him away and, like, tells him to stop yelling at me. And the second he's gone, I just kind of remake the sand lump, and that's it. And then I get up and I go join everyone else when we're going back inside. That's it. So that's always been how I've been, right? Like, there's never been a time where people saying you can't do this has ever materially worked in their favor, has ever gotten the intended results for them, simply because if I'm going to do something, I'm going to make sure I know what I'm doing first, right? Generally, when you are someone who is getting into something, like, for instance, chemistry, you want to know a little bit about it first before you start playing with it. Something I like to tell all these ex-witches turned Christians is that, like, well, if you wouldn't... BG. But right, if you were a chemist, you on day one, you don't go in there and start mixing chemicals that you don't know what they are or what they do. You read the textbook first. You get a couple lessons, units under your belt before you start getting into the lab. Likewise, with anything in life, you should know something about before you get into it. So that's why I joke that there's a reason that, like, Virgos are always right, and it's because if we are wrong, we get the correct information. We have no problem admitting when we are wrong. The second we have the information and we know concretely that we are correct, you cannot do anything, say anything to change our minds. The only thing that changes our minds, and realistically anyone who's like this, not just Virgos, but the only thing that can concretely change someone's mind after it's been made up, reasonably, should be facts. Hard, cold facts. I'm not a person who's going by emotion here. Of course I have a personal emotional investment in witchcraft because I think it's fun, but all of the evidence I've seen points towards, no, this is a real thing. And every rebuttal I've ever gotten has already been, in my research, heavily debunked, so I don't care. So when it comes to deflecting people who would just dogpile you with all of this insecure, decrepit orthodoxy, what I would say, honestly, is to just be solid in your own understanding, your own faith, your own research, right? Ask God to direct you where you need to be going, what you need to be doing. Don't worry about what people say, because ultimately a lot of these people don't know any better themselves. Instead of the blind leading the blind here, ask God directly to show you the way forward, and by God, I know for a fact He will, because He's done it for me. So, with all that said, I just wanted to talk about this because it's the first time in a long time I have been genuinely like, wow, that popped off. Not in the greatest way, but I'll take it. So, right, it's been a long time since I've had a Christian tornado roll up into my thing. So it was pretty entertaining. It was pretty funny to see that again after so long. I wanted to talk about it because maybe some people see all that and they get intimidated. Maybe they start worrying. Maybe they start all, being uncomfortable. All I can say is, if Christian witchcraft isn't for you, it's not for you. But if it is, the information is out there. and you can absolutely find it. And the people who would be so loud and so crude and so rude to other people, as the Bible says, there's nothing new under the sun, and these people are not helping God whatsoever by acting the way they act. So, with all that said, I hope this is a helpful little discussion, little chat. Tell me what you think in the comments, and I will see you guys next time. See ya!